Hello, and welcome to the Career Change Diaries podcast with me, Alice Stapleton. Hope everybody is doing good in January. It's feeling like the longest month ever for me, so good to know that we're nearly at the end. So today I am speaking to Jon Adams. Hi, Jon. How are you?
Hi, Alice. Nice to see you.
Yeah, lovely to see you too. So, Jon trained as a shipbroker and then for 12 years worked as a chartering manager for a ship owner. And then within the last year, he has transitioned into a control management role, continuing to work for the same employer, but in a entirely different capacity. So, what's quite interesting about Jon's journey is that whilst we worked together and looked at the possibility of a complete career change, what the outcome of us working together was him transitioning into a completely different role within the same industry, same company. So I think it's really good just to sort of understand that there's lots of different outcomes of contemplating a career shift. So, Jon, thank you for joining me. We were just chatting about the fact that we started working together just over a year ago, which has gone very, very quickly. So it would be really great just to start off with hearing a bit about, I guess, how you got into what you were doing before and how that started to feel over time.
Well, thanks for having me on. And
You're very welcome.
I think how I got into it is very relevant from the point of view of without a great deal of analysis is the simplest, shortest answer. When I was at university, I was studying English literature, which has few, let's say, direct, practical applications to a career in business, which is very much what my family wanted for me. And I'd say that a sense of expectation, wouldn't necessarily call it familial pressure, but that I should be in a certain kind of industry or job guided my hand in terms of what I thought was acceptable at that age coming out of university. Um,
Okay. And
and
what
yeah,
was on the list at that stage? What did you feel was expected?
well, yeah, law, banking, trading, this sort of relatively tight target. Um, but I didn't have, like I say, a very practical way in, given what I had studied. So I'd say there was a degree of panic. I
Hmm.
actually applied to law firms. I did a graduate diploma in law after I finished my undergraduate. So that's a 1 year compressed course that many people do before they become lawyers. And I was applying to lots of shipbroking firms in 2008, when the financial markets all fell apart, but so too did the shipping market. Um, so it went from a really almost generational high, a boom where ships were earning fabulous sums of money, to virtually no market at all. And that was the market that I was seeking employment in. And I
Right.
think probably like a lot of people who are my peers, uh, it was quite intimidating and daunting going to the city in 2009, and looking for jobs because a lot of very senior people were losing jobs, and it was a chaotic time. So in all of that and in my own uncertainty, somehow I came upon shipping. Honestly, I'm not 100% sure how. I'd done some summer internships working on boats, and found a very poorly paid internship in the city, and carried on from there.
Right. Okay. Well, so originally that was all you wanting to be a lawyer then, or was it just to be in that
No, it was actually my way
world
of
in
running
some
away from
capacity?
law, my way of not
All
becoming a
right.
lawyer. So I actually had a contract offer from a solicitor. I'm from the Cayman Islands, and so I had an offer in the UK and back at home. And I had even accepted the prepayment that they'd given me to pay for my law course, and had to pay that back once I got this offer from the first shipbroker I started working for, I was so delighted. I had to pay back a sum of money. It was a big pain. And the offer to start with the law firm was about 4 times as much as what I was
Oh, I
taking
can
for the internship.
imagine.
So
Yeah.
I was very motivated to try shipping. Let's say that, and it's a
Yeah.
very interesting industry. So I don't regret that.
And what was the what's the word? Oh, I don't know. What was the adverse reaction to the law firm offer?
Oh no, I mean, look, these are you know sophisticated organizations, and I guess one of the partners in Cayman took it a little personally, if I think back, but they just moved on and found the next trainee. Or what was my adverse
Yeah,
reaction?
yeah, yeah.
Pardon me.
What was it that was putting you off being a lawyer at that point?
I think it felt even more than going into shipping like a sort of surrendering of imagination.
Right.
I knew that there was a certain kind of job that I should have, and those are words now that we'll come back to, right? But um, somehow choosing law felt like I don't know, like almost giving up on trying something else.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Well, it's interesting how these expectations often influence us and yeah, make
Yeah.
us think that there's a certain path that we should follow. But it sounds
Well,
like
it's
you
that
were
word
sort of
"should."
aware of
Right?
that.
It's
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
an alarm bell, but I wasn't very thoughtful when I was 20 or 21 or whatever it was.
Yeah, it's tricky at that age, that's for sure. Okay, so that you get the offer for the internship within a shipping broker,
A
did you say?
shipbroking firm here in
Shipbroker.
London. So that entails taking a lot of market information and acting as a middleman between cargo interests and ship owners or ship operators, and trying to just make deals happen, try and take commission on those deals. Um, and I'd say that a lot has changed in that industry just generally, but particularly, I'd say the treatment and training of young people has come a very long way. Shipping's maybe a bit of a final frontier in many respects, that the corporate attitudes and zeitgeists that prevail, that I think most of your listeners will be familiar with, probably fell later in shipping. And, it's the advent of software even came later. When I first joined, there was still a guy with a typewriter writing up all the contracts, right? And a lot of the brokers would be in the pub at midday. And one of the first things I did was set up the, uh, phone quick dial that I could immediately send client calls to different pubs in
Oh my
Borough where the office
god.
was, so that the senior brokers could pick them up. And I mean, listen, those guys had been, a lot of them in the business 30, 40 years. The old Baltic Exchange, knew more, forgot more than I'll ever learn, right? Brilliant at it, but there was a certainly different professional set of expectations and way that they went about their day. So it was an incredible place to learn. I had such an incredible mentor, who I'm very lucky to have had. But it was a pretty informal structure, right? And a lot of other young trainees didn't catch on. I think it's a space where it's very much like there's a phone book, there's a telephone, go. Um, and in the absence of much structure, I remember some of the trainees who came through with me very fearful, felt very under pressure to make deals. And when it wasn't happening, it really got on their back. And, there was a degree of, not Wolf of Wall Street, nothing like that, but, shame, kind of corporate pushy, you're in at 1 minute past 8, slow clapping, and, very
Oh
masculine
wow.
environment. No girls on the floor. Maybe one or two in the the operations department, but brokers, no, just men. Very masculine environment, and like I said, quite pushy. Um, and you
And
get shouted at. You get shouted at by clients for sure. I mean, ooh.
and it's still a bit like that, would you say, or has it moved on?
Well, I think the change is really rapid just in the last few years.
Mm.
There's been a change throughout, but I'd say now that so I have some friends who are my contemporaries who've set up their own broking shop, and I see how they bring juniors on, both how they speak to them, how they try and structure training them, and I see that at some of the bigger shops too, and it's night and day. It's
Mm.
and absolutely right. Young people's development and business is it's the best investment you can make, right? If you give them a chance to succeed, then everybody's a winner, right?
Yeah, definitely. Well, so tell me a little bit about the internship and then what that led to in your career.
Um, so I'd say that uh, again, to come back to familial expectations, I don't think it's a stretch to say that I come from a family of workaholics, um, and that therefore I fit the internship rather well. The I'd say shipping at least casts itself as a very vocational space, even though it's in fact a business and corporate job, right? Um,
Yeah.
and so there was, and I think to an extent, there is this expectation that people will just sacrifice their lives to it, work ever so hard because there's only so many roles within it. It's rather a niche space. It is something of a different narrative arc to being in trading or in any kind of job in the city. And I worked really hard, kind of put
Just
most of the
threw
rest of my
yourself
life
into it.
on hold and embraced it a bit like a workaholic, and therefore I had some measure of early success. But in hindsight, I'd say that came perhaps at the expense of maybe some healthier, gradated, learnings and integrations of it, and that again, in hindsight, probably set things up for being a bit untenable. If you're holding yourself to a standard where you've got to be on every minute, you'll hit the wall eventually. You need a healthier balance internally than that. Um,
And how long were you that workaholic before you yourself hit the wall?
I'd say when did we say we met?
Well, about a year ago.
Yeah, about a year. I'd
So
say
what was that? 10? Well, what was it? 10,
it's
12
about 14
years?
years I worked.
Right.
Uh, my wife, who when I first met her was a trainee teacher, was earning more than me at the time. So I really started on very, very little. Um, has seen it go all the way through and is very understanding about it all. Um, we used to have an agreement that I'd turn my phone off for one week of the year, one holiday, 1 week. I'd turn my phone off, and even in those weeks, inevitably something would come up. So, um, I think that's part of the thing is that I really let work get into every crevice of my life. There was no off button, um, and that's on me. More than anything else. Yes, there was a culture that was there, but I think it's for lack of an analysis and lack of a modeling in my own life that such boundaries are important.
Okay, so it's not necessarily the nature of that sort of job so much. It sounds yeah, there's a cultural element, but it's not the sort of job where you do have to be plugged in constantly, or is there a
I
bit
think
of
you'll
that?
find a lot of well, I can only speak for me, but I would guess
Right.
that you'd find a lot of other people, especially older than me, but especially older than me and of the same generation, where that's the unspoken expectation is. I think
Okay.
that's true of a lot of jobs in the city. Look, at the end of the day, there are there are good salaries on offer. There's good bonuses on offer if you make it right. And I think it's hazing is slightly too far, but there's this sense of well, we've come through and we've sacrificed a lot. That's what it takes.
And so you'll
There's the
do the
door if you don't
same.
like it.
Mm.
Um,
Well, because the reason I ask is I'm so often struck that with some jobs that there's this made up urgency that makes
Mm.
us feel or assume that the job is urgent and that, yes, you should be replying at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning because it is an emergency. And sometimes when you drill down on, okay, well, what is that emergency? What is that deadline? It's just because some humans made it up, well, we just need to get it done by Tuesday. And then everyone else is kind of dying in the wings trying to make it happen. But I imagine there are some jobs, there are some roles where maybe it just is essential. Maybe things do go wrong in the shipping world at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm not
Well, they
sure.
certainly do. Although that's much more true to say of people who work in the technical management of the ships, dealing with the captains when they might run aground and so on. I was in a sales role. Um, and, you mentioned being a chartering manager. We have a lot of archaic terms that come from the old days of Britain ruling the waves and so on. So,
Right.
chartering is the activity of legally contracting the ship's employment. And, I think the urgency that is, to a degree, fabricated is that no one would ever want to miss the opportunity for those for the sales for the either as a
Mm,
broker to make the deal as a middleman, that if you sleep another broker will jump in, or if you're working for a ship owner, that not being on right then, it's the possibility of the missed opportunity,
mm,
um which it is true to an extent, right? But at the same time, um surely, well, anyway, I think you hit the nail on the head that there's a degree of it being fabricated, and there's a collective culture of establishing that. Um,
yeah. Well, it's that human need not to miss out, isn't it?
mm,
That
mm.
plays into so many different things. Okay. So I get the sense that you're burning out slowly but surely. um, is
Well, I
is
should
that
say that I went from that broking environment very quickly. Within 2 years, I went in house and worked for one of my clients. Um, and I've been on an odyssey with him ever since. A very close relationship. I still work with that client, who's now been my boss and colleague for 12 years. And his company was bought. We've gone through a series of mergers. So I've actually, from the point I joined his very small outfit and I moved to Texas, where I lived for 8 years. From that point, in a way, I've not changed job. It's just that I've done the same job for an organization that's got bigger and bigger and bigger.
right,
Um, so
right. So tell me what was going on for you then when you decided to work with a coach on things.
yeah, so I guess two things as briefly as I can. Um, on the one hand, I mentioned that in 2008 there was this super cycle of China importing lots and lots of everything, and then suddenly stopping. I didn't go into that detail, but as financial markets collapsed, so too did the shipping market, and those things were broadly hand in hand with Chinese developments. Um, so most of my career had actually been in a very poor market. Ship earnings for a decade were very low compared
Right.
to a lot of their historical averages. And then as we came out of COVID, uh, shipping went bananas again, really almost back to that super cycle, in some instances, even higher in certain ways. So having got used to a very cheap market and all the things that entails, the parameters of loss, the just all the default expectations went out the window. So for a period from about 2021 to 2023 when we met,
Mm-hmm.
um, suddenly the risk factor went through the roof. The volatility in rates was really spectacular, and there were some really roller coaster rides. So probably quite a very much at the conservative end of what I do. I'm a relatively risk averse. I try and build systems up. So this caused me a great degree of consternation. And I guess simultaneous to that, the organization I was working for, as I say, was getting bigger and bigger. And I went from working in a very traditional, let's say, old school shipping shop that was just shipping focused into an environment that had uh, an element of corporate expectation management um, that is only latterly really finding its way into shipping. You know, of course, there have been bigger corporate companies, but asking this very niche trading on the oceans to speak to a sort of financial institution that owns it is something of a clash of cultures. And I was
Okay.
finding myself very much torn between those two pressures whilst the markets were hugely volatile and the risk of massive loss, but also massive reward was just exponentially larger than it had been at any other point in my career. So I'd say that that caused a degree of stress, right? I mean, as
Right.
all volatility does, coupled with an increasing frustration with the lack of addressing those tensions and creating clear boundaries between the two sides. You know, they need each other. They need the old school shipping guys who know the market inside out, but they also need, you know, financial institutions and more corporate oversight. And so I'd say it's a simultaneous pressure on both those points.
Okay. And what sorts of things were going through your head then about your career and its longevity and your
Mm.
options and that sort of
I was
thing?
frustrated. That's the first thing to say. I was in a very frustrated place. But I think we're all guided by a little bit of chance and luck. Every now and then we have moments of clarity. And in the moment of my sort of maximum frustration where my instinct was to throw the computer out the window and say, I'm done. I
Oh,
reflected
we
that,
would we all love to do that
right,
sometimes.
yeah.
That dramatic
I
moment of
reflected that my employers have actually been very, very good to me over a long period of time. And that I've made very few good decisions like that. So I called up, you know, my line manager and I said, I've just finished this crisis for you. I've just put that one to bed. I'm going to take some time because I haven't really ever taken the maximum of my holiday. I'm going to take a couple of weeks off. Um, and I just need some space to think. And, you know, I'll come back and talk about all these things. And I just started Googling, you know, what do I do when I'm in that space in my career, you know, and said to myself, before I make any drastic decisions, I'd like to analyze this. I'd like to get some external guidance on how to make the best decision here. And as I say, God knows what, you know, angel was on my shoulder when I said that, because it's correct. I think it's not just true in career change, in all things in life. If you're in a really stressful situation, there's a lot of emotion involved. It's great to get outside of yourself, talk to somebody else, right?
yeah.
The 21st century, there's so much really good guidance out there. And getting into a place, so this guy, Shane Parrish, I forget the name of his book even, but it's about the, you know, level-headed thinking, giving yourself the best chance to make the right decision. Often
Yeah.
involves some objectivity outside yourself.
I remember being told by someone, yeah, no, never make a decision when you're in, a heightened state of any emotion, really,
Yeah, yeah.
especially one if you're upset or angry or stressed. Because, yeah, I think the default reaction is always going to be quite an extreme one. Um, okay, so using coaching to think through it all help you make a bit more of a thought through decision by the sounds
But
of
I
it.
just add to that that there was this niggling sense in the back of my mind that I can't just blame everything on my employer, right? They are actually quite fair to me.
Yeah.
Every organization on the planet has some form of dysfunction. That's just a universal truth, right? Because nothing's perfect. But I was sufficiently self-aware to know that um, this isn't just, oh, I hate these guys or that I hate this job because it's given me so many wonderful things. So I guess I had an intuition that some of it was personal. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that it would be better to keep my side of the street clean, right? Before I start pointing the finger and saying, none of you are good enough. I'm going to go do something else. Right? So
Yeah. Well, yeah, because otherwise you just risk bouncing around to various different situations and yeah, thinking it's going to be different. But if what's causing the issues coming from you, you just take the
you're going
problem
to
with
take it to the
you.
next one, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, definitely. Okay, so through through the coaching, what did you uncover about yourself that was helpful in understanding a bit more about what was going on?
yeah, um, I guess at this point I would characterize the coaching as uh, the careers advice that I wish I'd had at 18. That when I don't know if you had this at your school, but the career advisors that came into ours sort of asked us to sit a couple bizarre tests where you
Mm-hmm.
did some pattern recognition or whatever. You did another thing, and then maybe you had a 5 minute interview with someone who it didn't feel cared very much. And, the machine would spit something out and say, you should be a lawyer in my case. Um, so um, I felt like the coaching template, that we worked to was really helpful for just breaking down some quite simplistic questions about myself that probably didn't tell me anything in particular that I didn't already know, but rationalized the order in which you asked
Mm.
them and allowed me just a more objective analysis of who I am and what I want and how that maps specifically onto work, right? Because between familial pressure, boarding school, early career in that, you know, world that's now gone in a weird way, 2008, 2009, all those things, I just sort of drifted into it without really ever sitting down and thinking why. And I'd say that's the most, in of itself, just the most effective thing that I've had of it is to go back through careful consideration of what my preferences are, what my strengths are, what my weaknesses are, all of those things, and map it onto, does that mean that you have to do them? Or are there other things that you could choose? And just having a forum for open mindedness and self reflection was really helpful.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, I think I've had a couple of clients where they've said it's not that it's new information. It's not like they're having a revelation about themselves. That there's this sort of sense that, as you said, they did kind of know, but because it's got so lost in the noise, it's quite hard to access. So there's something about the framework that just gives you the structure just to piece those bits of the puzzle together really
yeah.
and start to make a bit more sense of it.
Well, maybe another way of saying it is that the open mindedness is key, right? It's almost giving yourself permission to reassess the data of you, with fresh eyes. And, some of those eyes are external in the form of the coach, but also your own, right? Because I think that there's a lot of internal narratives that I hadn't addressed that, for example, oh, but I can't change now, right? Oh, I'm so far down that, any change will just be to throw away anything I've done to date. And things like that that are unhelpful and in a way close off the end point of your own reflections. I think that when you think about things on your own, it's really easy to think that you're being logical.
Mm.
But without someone else saying, "Oh no, 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 finish that thought. Why couldn't that work?" You're not always aware of the extent to which feelings, emotions, whatever else it might be, are stopping your logical processes because, you're bringing something into the picture. So I think a really simplistic, sometimes almost toe curlingly so, it is a little reductive. It's a little like go back to really square one basics, but going back to them and really being open minded and allowing yourself to see things, to say things out loud. I think that's powerful because you've
Yeah.
got these conclusions in your mind you're not always aware of.
Well, what's that saying that fear is an acronym of oh, what is it? False evidence appearing
Oh, right, yeah.
real.
But
You
also
know that.
prejudice, right? You prejudge yourself, you prejudge outcomes, you think you know more than you do.
Yeah, definitely. So so it sounds like the coaching gave you an opportunity maybe just to think a bit more widely and openly about what your options could be. So can you remember roughly what was on your short list of career options, which you
I think
then
it's
started to
still,
dig into a bit more?
yeah, I mean, I guess, and it's again to occupy that somewhat artificial space as if you're 18 again, just,
Mm-hmm.
uh, um, I quite liked the idea of working in some kind of media communications to, I don't know, a variety of organizations working in spaces where, negotiating or communicating, which are things that I have done a lot of, maybe are working towards broader strategic goals of government, for example, or diplomacy or anything like that. Again, working with lots of people from around the world, something that I've done lots of. So I guess in those examples, I was looking at still relatively minor shifts in terms of the focus of what I was doing. Um, but I guess maybe a little less purely profit based, right? That's something that characterizes still the work that I do is that, ultimately the goal of what I do is make a profit. And there's a tension in the long term for me that I recognize that's not necessarily what I care about solely in my life.
Mm.
But interestingly enough, to maybe jump ahead, um, I still think that you can work for companies whose goal is profit motivation, but work for them in a capacity where you're being fulfilled by other things. And I think that's some of the secret sauce of how I'm now making a new formula for myself, right?
Yeah, you found a space in your current industry, in your current organization that really plays to your sense of
Hopefully
purpose and
so. It's still a
yeah,
work in progress. So,
for now anyway. Um, okay, so you had a couple of ideas, which sounds like you sort of extracted all of the transferable skills and experience that you enjoyed from what you were doing before, and you were thinking about how you could package that up in a slightly different way. And I do remember it was very clear that you had some strengths around communication and strategy and that sort of thing. Um, so tell me a little bit about your exploration of those short list of ideas and what you came across, what you experienced as you sort of sifted through those ideas.
um, before I answer that, I'd also say that as important as um, the exercises that asked you to know about your capacities and weaknesses, right, and transferable skills, say that another of the exercises that was very useful was about um, doing some analysis of how much of a role work you wanted work to play in your life. How, and thinking about it in the context of balance. I think for me was a really big part of um, the reshaping and packaging of a new, intuitive direction. That I not only did I want certain skills to transfer over, but I knew that I wanted to find some new role that didn't involve workaholism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Certainly
Mm-hmm.
dedication and professionalism, absolutely, but that there were better boundaries set, and I think that's an important caveat or
Yeah, I
additional
think
point.
yeah, I think the word boundaries was a big word for you
Oh yeah,
whilst
oh yeah.
we
I had very
were
few, so
working together.
um,
Yeah.
establishing them was going to be key. But to answer your question, let's say that one of the arenas that still fascinates me and that it can be a hobby. I certainly follow the news very closely. Is international relations, diplomacy efforts. I was fascinated when I was um, researching that, how relatively hard to access information is about organizations, a lot of them non-profit or research based, who seek to influence government thinking over specific regional disputes, seek to maintain open dialogue with the correct actors in certain areas. I mean, it's incredibly worthy work, but it's not like there's a big clear front door where you go knock and find your way
Mm-hmm.
in. And I was struck in researching them at how similarly hard to access they seemed to when I was first trying to get into shipping. I felt very
Right.
sort of similar behind closed doors, and I can't help but reflect that some of the how they even have offerings for roles and so on seem to ask for exactly the same thing that I had on entry to shipping, which is a start on very, very little and work in because you are vocationally drawn to this, and let's see where that goes, and part of why I made that caveat about boundaries was I could feel how I might be getting drawn into yet another place that workaholism might be demanded of me.
Right. Okay.
And if you think about it, a lot of the people who are involved in organizations like that, probably are sacrificing a piece of themselves because they believe so much in the mission of whatever it is that they're working on. And no matter how much I was drawn to that, I'll admit to there being a hugely selfish um, goal that I had in working with you and making these assessments, that I was primarily, here to help myself, to give myself those boundaries, to live a more balanced home life. I've got two kids, and so I guess the first observation I have is that the online space, the offerings, the way those companies present themselves gave me an inkling that they might not be for me, that there was something
Right.
similar going on there.
Bit
And
of
I
a
followed
red
a few of
flag.
the people. Yeah, it was a red flag. And in a way, the devil I know is one where I've gone through a great degree of personal sacrifices too lofty, especially in the world we live in now, where you see. But I've gone through, let's say, a deferment of pleasure, in order to have it tomorrow. And I'm at a point of seniority in my career where um, I guess I've established my credentials more than if I was just in a completely new field. So that's one avenue. I also had the benefit of some network, through personal contacts, that I was able to go to an event in the city that was designed to put people in the civil space in touch with people in the defense industry, specifically, in ministries, trying to uh, promote dialogue and so on. And again, I guess it was helpful in the red flags that it flew up. Um, that I've got to be careful how I put this. I could
Being
definitely sense.
diplomatic yourself.
Yeah, well, I could definitely sense that I'd possibly be a poor fit in big government departments, at least as they're currently composed. I don't know. There's a
What
certain
felt different?
um, I guess, coming from a relatively small organization universe, um, there's an alacrity of thinking, a willingness to sort of just try anything that I think goes out the window. The process of we must follow this way, we must follow that way.
We've already
Really,
always done
even
it
in the
this way.
face. Sorry.
As in, like, well, we've always done it this way, so we'll do it this way again, or
Yeah,
just having to
and
follow a process.
follow a process. I mean, I didn't feel like though we were in a room to try and foster, new modes of thought, I didn't feel like many people were actually open to that.
Mm,
That there was a certain kind of groupthink that prevailed, right? And if I said anything provocative or that was like a slightly different take, start again. It was a very, to me, homogenous way of thinking that was
mm,
present in that room. Um, and I have some direct experience of trading in some pretty rough areas of the world. And uh, I think that quite often there's an angle to everything. And if you're going to be dealing with that space, you probably have to rub shoulders with pretty ugly things and people. But there was a very groupthink way that provocative new ideas were really just, noses were wrinkled and it was dismissed. I said, well, okay. And I didn't even take that personally. I saw that happen with a couple other things that just made me think, oh, I wouldn't want to work in such a sort of monolithic
mm.
space. I quite like small.
And do you think you would have picked that up anywhere else if you hadn't immersed yourself in that world, even for just a short period of time?
Listen, there's of course in every industry a huge amount of variety available, right? And I'd say that my real explorations were cut short to a degree in
What
looking
from that
outside.
experience?
No, 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 no. More
All right.
because the possibility of negotiating a new position internally to the organization that I work for emerged. And I guess I took the view that smaller shifts um, can be just as effective, right? And that I guess it was a simpler objective to give that a try first. And some of the process that we went through gave me the luxury of feeling less pressured about it. That change can be established over 20 years or 20 days, and different changes can happen, right? So being more open to change is one of the best things I think I've got from it. And being open to the possibility that the best changes are incremental or small. Um, and so I sort of took the view of, well, you know what, my first couple forays haven't exactly enlivened me. I've not gone out and thought, oh, I've been missing something. And then over here in my left hand, something nearer to home starts to emerge. Well, let's give that a go, right? Let's give that a go and see if I can build in all of the things that I have built in terms of what I think a perfect job might look like for me, or a better job might look like. Um,
Okay.
and
So
that
it
became more
was
the focus.
that was more of a not not coincidence, but along those lines that that opportunity closer to home happened to be presenting itself at the same time you were exploring more drastic changes that weren't really setting your world on fire by the sounds of it.
Well, certainly there were things there that interested me, but it came back to that: why am I making a change? I'm really interested in what I do, right? In many ways, the world of shipping ticks a lot of the boxes that I'm talking about in the world of negotiating in an international
Mm,
relations space. Um, so actually, would I be making the change for almost external reasons to show that I've changed and to put some new thing on my CV, or am I making the change to reformulate how my day operates? How I tick, how I set boundaries, and so on. And I came to the conclusion, right or wrong, that staying closer to home transferred more of my skills. Um, Probably was a sensible choice for me. Everyone's different, right? But was the right space, and gave me a better platform to, I guess, renegotiate the structure of my day, the structure of my week, month, year, how my reporting is done from scratch with the benefit of a bit of analysis.
hmm.
And I've been hugely fortunate to have an employer who, at least to date, has been willing to experiment with that with me. So,
So tell me a little bit about what's changed in your role that has made the difference.
um, well, that I no longer trade in any capacity, right? For years I was just trading ships on the water and trading the cargoes that they carried, and now I work with the teams that do that, um, and try to act as a liaison between them and other departments of the company, particularly headquarters management, with views to things like targets, more role specificity, better use of software and analytics, assessments, reviewing how that has been done. A lot of that, let's say, had been happening, but I'd argue in a somewhat rudimentary fashion. And when you're dealing with such niche expertise, as a lot of my colleagues have on the front trading line, um, I think there's a sort of, it's only fair that the assessment, the target setting, all of those things that I've just described, the control function that oversees what they do, has a good degree of experience of it in itself. And I think that's at least why to date I've been trusted with sitting in that in between role, is that I do have that. I have to learn a lot about the corporate side, um,
Yeah.
and that's a crash course. But I'd say, interestingly enough, that role probably suits me a bit better. The sort of more central administrator, and building systems suits me, and I enjoy that. Um,
Well, it makes me think of what you said at the beginning that you were interested in going into business.
hmm.
Yes, your degree probably didn't pave that path. So interestingly, it sounds like you have sort of gone into the business side of your current organization as opposed to being the sales, external facing side of it.
Yeah, I think
Um,
that's fair characterization. And what it means is that a lot of the urgencies, fabricated or not, of the everyday of taking care of those ships. I would for such a long time, go to bed with an unfixed ship, so to speak. A ship that I knew was open in the next few days, and I still hadn't, found her deal, locked in the contract. And I mean, my stomach would be churning. I'd take it so. I'd be
mm,
up thinking, have I missed an angle? Have I forgotten to call somebody? And there was a sense of urgency to every single position, right? And zeitgeisty though it is, there's that graph you see now between urgency and importance. I'd say
mhm.
that very little of what I do is ever really urgent anymore. The bane of my life is to try and get these chartering managers to stop and consider some of the things that I'm talking to them about, because they're important from the perspective that senior management have asked me to get them to consider it. But yeah, more of what I do operates on longer term timescales, has importance, but maybe lacks some of that urgency. And I need to
Mm,
balance that, and I need to speak to
yeah.
them in a way that sells to them its importance.
Well, and again, we talked earlier about an interest in strategy, and I guess the roles that fall into that important box, they're often the strategic ones that have those bigger picture view over organizational challenges. But as you say, everyone's so busy putting out fires, they struggle to work on those. So yeah, interesting that you've moved into that more strategic space that you were
Hopefully
looking
so. I
for.
only hesitate there because it is still new, and um, I think I'm just starting to feel like some of the work that I'm doing is worthwhile. I thought about it before our call to try and give an analogy, that because what I do is so niche, it's a little tricky to. Some of being in the chartering role is the seat that I think most people want, if that makes sense. Whether they're suited to it or not, there's this sense that it's the role to get to. And I think some of my reticence in leaving it is that externally I felt like people would think I was mad, right? That, oh, God, why would you get out of that role and go into something else? And I think it's a bit like if you worked for the police services, if you were already a detective and you wanted to move into internal affairs, right? Most people would say, "What? Why on earth would you do that?" And most of the other detectives are horrified at. I mean, that's not quite true,
Mm,
and I can't speak for them, but I think are just shocked and can't quite make out what this change is all about. Um, but again, it's for me, right? And it suits me. And whatever the difficulties are of getting those two hands to speak to each other and communicate more effectively, um, that's the challenge of the role. And that's where I need to be diplomatic, but I also need to communicate really well. The quality of my communication is the extent to which I don't just, because I don't have the seniority to go in and say, now you do it this way. I have to engender buy-in. I have to know enough about what both sides' intentions are and what they're seeking to to win them over. And I'm not sure that I've got there yet with everybody. But that's enlivening to me. And that's, again, that's
yeah,
the good thing that I'm enjoying, is that um I think you found one of the right jobs for you that can work when what's difficult and what would be frustrating for most people just makes you go, oh, that's an interesting problem. How am I gonna get that right? So, and I'm having that quite a lot. I'm enjoying the difficulties that I have in front of me.
oh, that's really lovely to hear. Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Yeah,
Hmm.
often, as you say, well, it's that sort of what might be someone's limitation or weakness is somebody else's strength. And yeah, it sounds like you quite enjoy the things that other people might be avoiding.
Yeah, I think so. And
Mm.
yeah.
So we touched on how you felt perhaps this was a medium, what's the word, outcome, a medium term outcome, and that there might be longer term shifts to be made further down the line.
Hmm.
What sits behind that feeling?
Um, I think it's to do with the unchallenged assumption I used to have that change would lead to this never very well defined, bad, dramatic, consequential outcomes, right? That sort of, oh, I can't change, I just can't. And I think that the best thing that the coaching has given to me is a much more balanced and objective outlook about. I probably spent most of my career just fearful that I'd lose my job. Deep down, right? Even though I had an awful lot of data to prove that I was valuable to the organization and that I had built up a degree of expertise, and certainly not more than some, and so on. But I can say with some calm now, that was really not tethered to much reality. I was living in a fearfulness.
Mm,
And um, I think I've just shed some of that. That change in itself is okay. Work doesn't have to be the be all and end all. And having got there, it just makes my shoulders more relaxed. That maybe I'll this new role will work out, and I'll do it till the day I retire, and you know, be a silly little party and a cake and some silly watch, and that'll be that, right? Maybe, or maybe not. And should I change again? I guess I embrace that as a concept more readily with less fear, right? And I think as well, it helped me take stock a little of my own intrinsic value as a cog in a work machine. I think that I, for a really long time, characterized, oh well, companies are primary and people, we're all expendable, and I've just got to hustle because otherwise I'll be thrown out. And I think I've genuinely accepted that, I have some intrinsic worth, and should it not work out here, that's okay. There's a million other things that I can go explore, and I have a bit of a template for how to explore. Maybe that's a good way of putting it. Career change coach or job change coach. It doesn't need in itself to lead to specific outcomes, even right then. It can just give you a template for how to think more calmly and where you'd go to if you were to think about it whenever you're ready. Um, it's a good tagline.
yeah, yeah, definitely. I might use that.
Yeah.
Make it a reel. Um,
So then to your
yeah.
question, it feels medium term because I'm open to other possibilities whenever they might come along. But right now, I feel really good, so
Hmm.
I'll
But
stay.
yeah, it just sounds like you're less attached. You're more open to what may come about. Um,
And ironically, I think that makes me a better employee. I think approaching every day with a kind of even keel, um, and degree of maturity, hopefully emotional maturity about it, means that though 5, 10 years from now I might not be doing this, I'm much more able to see, well, what's the problem right now, be as productive as I can there, and then turn it off and go see my kids. Much
mm.
better than I used to be able to do that. So
And can you envisage yourself having more of a dramatic change next time, or do you think it will be another
sure, I
something
think
close
if
to
my
where
life
you are now?
circumstances allowed it, um, and listen, what, it's the 20th right now. We're probably hours from Donald Trump being sworn in, right? Uh, it's a it's a volatile and changing world, right? We might not get choices, right? I mean, I think that's something really worth saying, is that what a world we live in, that we have these options as, capitalist workers to go out and, you know, sell our labor in such a free and liquid market as exists. I think you can lose sight of that. Should the world take a darker turn, I might just have to do all sorts of things, right?
Mm, yeah,
Um, so who knows what's around the corner? Could I envisage a more dramatic change? Yes, for the worse in those circumstances. But also, I think that once you foster that open-mindedness, who knows what opportunities might come up. I think that when you take the lenses off of, oh, but that's impossible, you just start to see possibilities, and then a broader array of opportunities might fall into your lap, right?
yeah, yeah, definitely. Always, there's always choices, always
Mm.
options. Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think that's been a really helpful discussion. It's just been quite interesting to explore the journey that you went on, and yeah, considering those slightly more drastic changes, and yeah, what ended up being where you are now, and that negotiation with your organization to create a role that actually is giving you everything that you were looking for in some of the more drastic
Most of,
changes by the
most
yeah,
stuff, right?
most of
Nothing's
them. Yeah.
perfect, but certainly it feels like a better balance now. And for as long as they equally feel like it provides them value, then I'm excited to see where it goes.
Yeah. And if you had to impart one pearl of wisdom to any other career shifters listening, any
Apart from that, I have very little. Um, well, what to say? Uh, I think that just being open-minded to um, to the fact that it doesn't have to all come at once. I think that's the really big key. When I first started that negotiated change, I was even open to really a much smaller change where I was still doing a lot of my old responsibilities, but was taking on a couple other things. It turned out that there was a bit of readiness from their side for more. But whether it's such a small change, within an organization that I've made, or a much more drastic one, actually the biggest change is internal, right? And so gradually getting there can take a long time, and then when it's ready, all that other stuff will fall into place, right?
mm,
So it doesn't have to happen overnight. I guess that's my pearl, if such
yeah.
exists.
Yeah, be patient, one step at a time.
Yeah.
Definitely. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And you've
Well, I
said
hope
that people
that's what
can.
you were aiming for. I hope I had anything helpful to say.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and you've said that you're welcome for people to contact you on LinkedIn if they want to just
Should they
hear a
wish to,
bit
I'm
more
open to
about
messaging
what
and
you
discussing
do
that.
and that world. Yeah, I mean, I have to say it's not a world I know a huge amount about. So yeah, it might be that it piques somebody's interest. And do give me a follow on Instagram as well, Alice Stapleton. And yeah, just to say thanks again, Jon, and wish you all the best for the future, and hopefully speak to you soon.
Thank you, Alice. And
Okay,
yeah, I've very much enjoyed working with you. Thanks.
thank you.
All right.